Imagine waking up tomorrow and all the governments on the planet officially announcing that extraterrestrials exist and have been hiding this for decades. Could you continue going to work normally? Or would the world simply stop? That's precisely the starting point of D-Day, Steven Spielberg's new film. And today we're going to analyze this work from several angles: script, direction, cinematography, symbolism, human psychology, social criticism, and why this might be the director's most philosophical film since Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Before we dive into the story of D-Day, it's important to understand the creative mind behind this project. And when it comes to science fiction, very few filmmakers have built a legacy as influential and recognizable as Steven Spielberg. For decades, Spielberg has crafted a career around exploring the unknown. But there's something that sets his films apart from many others in the genre. For him, extraterrestrials and the unknown are rarely portrayed as simple threats. More often than not, they serve as a reflection of humanity itself. Rather than focusing solely on invasions, battles, or large-scale destruction, Spielberg is interested in exploring how ordinary people react when everything they once believed to be true is suddenly called into question. This approach can be seen throughout his filmography. In Close Encounters of the Third Kind, for example, humanity's contact with an alien intelligence is presented almost as a spiritual awakening, inspiring awe, curiosity, and transformation. In E.T. the Extraterrestrial, the relationship between a lonely child and a visitor from another world becomes a story about friendship, empathy, and belonging, far more than one about science or adventure. Even in darker films like War of the Worlds, the real focus isn't simply the alien invasion itself, but the human response to fear, chaos, uncertainty, and the instinct to protect the people we love. This storytelling philosophy has defined Spielberg's career for decades, and everything suggests that D-Day follows the same path. Based on what the film presents, the central question isn't merely whether intelligent life exists beyond Earth. Instead, it asks something far more profound. What would happen to our society if a truth of this magnitude were officially confirmed? Just imagine the consequences. How would the world's religions respond? How would governments explain years, or perhaps decades, of silence if they had known the truth all along? How would science react to encountering a civilization thousands of years more advanced than our own? And how would ordinary people continue their daily lives after discovering that humanity is not alone in the universe? These questions elevate the film beyond traditional science fiction. Rather than telling a story about aliens, it uses the possibility of extraterrestrial contact as a vehicle to explore deeply human themes such as fear, identity, power, uncertainty, and our endless need to find answers for everything that surrounds us. There's another fascinating aspect of Spielberg's filmmaking style. He approaches the unknown with a sense of wonder. While many directors portray aliens as enemies to be defeated, Spielberg often invites audiences to face the unknown with curiosity, even when that curiosity is accompanied by fear. Perhaps that's exactly what has made his films so timeless. They don't simply ask whether life exists on other planets. They ask who we are when confronted with the unimaginable vastness of the universe. D-Day appears to follow that same philosophy. Long before offering any definitive answers, the film challenges viewers with an uncomfortable question. Is humanity truly prepared to learn a truth capable of rewriting its entire history? That question echoes throughout nearly every scene, becoming the foundation upon which the entire story is built. And it also serves as the perfect starting point for the discussions we'll explore throughout the rest of this video. Before we dive into the story of D-Day, it's important to understand the creative mind behind this project. And when it comes to science fiction, very few filmmakers have built a legacy as influential and recognizable as Steven Spielberg. For decades, Spielberg has crafted a career around exploring the unknown. But there's something that sets his films apart from many others in the genre. For him, extraterrestrials and the unknown are rarely portrayed as simple threats. More often than not, they serve as a reflection of humanity itself. Rather than focusing solely on invasions, battles, or large-scale destruction, Spielberg is interested in exploring how ordinary people react when everything they once believed to be true is suddenly called into question. This approach can be seen throughout his filmography. In Close Encounters of the Third Kind, for example, humanity's contact with an alien intelligence is presented almost as a spiritual awakening, inspiring awe, curiosity, and transformation. In E.T. the Extraterrestrial, the relationship between a lonely child and a visitor from another world becomes a story about friendship, empathy, and belonging, far more than one about science or adventure. Even in darker films like War of the Worlds, the real focus isn't simply the alien invasion itself, but the human response to fear, chaos, uncertainty, and the instinct to protect the people we love. This storytelling philosophy has defined Spielberg's career for decades, and everything suggests that D-Day follows the same path. Based on what the film presents, the central question isn't merely whether intelligent life exists beyond Earth. Instead, it asks something far more profound. What would happen to our society if a truth of this magnitude were officially confirmed? Just imagine the consequences. How would the world's religions respond? How would governments explain years, or perhaps decades, of silence if they had known the truth all along? How would science react to encountering a civilization thousands of years more advanced than our own? And how would ordinary people continue their daily lives after discovering that humanity is not alone in the universe? These questions elevate the film beyond traditional science fiction. Rather than telling a story about aliens, it uses the possibility of extraterrestrial contact as a vehicle to explore deeply human themes such as fear, identity, power, uncertainty, and our endless need to find answers for everything that surrounds us. There's another fascinating aspect of Spielberg's filmmaking style. He approaches the unknown with a sense of wonder. While many directors portray aliens as enemies to be defeated, Spielberg often invites audiences to face the unknown with curiosity, even when that curiosity is accompanied by fear. Perhaps that's exactly what has made his films so timeless. They don't simply ask whether life exists on other planets. They ask who we are when confronted with the unimaginable vastness of the universe. D-Day appears to follow that same philosophy. Long before offering any definitive answers, the film challenges viewers with an uncomfortable question. Is humanity truly prepared to learn a truth capable of rewriting its entire history? That question echoes throughout nearly every scene, becoming the foundation upon which the entire story is built. And it also serves as a perfect starting point for the discussions we'll explore throughout the rest of this video. Before we dive into the story of D-Day, it's important to understand the creative mind behind this project. And when it comes to science fiction, very few filmmakers have built a legacy as influential and recognizable as Steven Spielberg. For decades, Spielberg has crafted a career around exploring the unknown. But there's something that sets his films apart from many others in the genre. For him, extraterrestrials and the unknown are rarely portrayed as simple threats. More often than not, they serve as a reflection of humanity itself. Rather than focusing solely on invasions, battles, or large-scale destruction, Spielberg is interested in exploring how ordinary people react when everything they once believed to be true is suddenly called into question. This approach can be seen throughout his filmography. In Close Encounters of the Third Kind, for example, humanity's contact with an alien intelligence is presented almost as a spiritual awakening, inspiring awe, curiosity, and transformation. In E.T. the Extraterrestrial, the relationship between a lonely child and a visitor from another world becomes a story about friendship, empathy, and belonging, far more than one about science or adventure. Even in darker films like War of the Worlds, the real focus isn't simply the alien invasion itself, but the human response to fear, chaos, uncertainty, and the instinct to protect the people we love. This storytelling philosophy has defined Spielberg's career for decades, and everything suggests that D-Day follows the same path. Based on what the film presents, the central question isn't merely whether intelligent life exists beyond Earth. Instead, it asks something far more profound. What would happen to our society if a truth of this magnitude were officially confirmed? Just imagine the consequences. How would the world's religions respond? How would governments explain years, or perhaps decades, of silence if they had known the truth all along? How would science react to encountering a civilization thousands of years more advanced than our own? And how would ordinary people continue their daily lives after discovering that humanity is not alone in the universe? These questions elevate the film beyond traditional science fiction. Rather than telling a story about aliens, it uses the possibility of extraterrestrial contact as a vehicle to explore deeply human themes such as fear, identity, power, uncertainty, and our endless need to find answers for everything that surrounds us. There's another fascinating aspect of Spielberg's filmmaking style. He approaches the unknown with a sense of wonder. While many directors portray aliens as enemies to be defeated, Spielberg often invites audiences to face the unknown with curiosity, even when that curiosity is accompanied by fear. Perhaps that's exactly what has made his films so timeless. They don't simply ask whether life exists on other planets. They ask who we are when confronted with the unimaginable vastness of the universe. D-Day appears to follow that same philosophy. Long before offering any definitive answers, the film challenges viewers with an uncomfortable question. Is humanity truly prepared to learn a truth capable of rewriting its entire history? That question echoes throughout nearly every scene, becoming the foundation upon which the entire story is built. And it also serves as the perfect starting point for the discussions we'll explore throughout the rest of this video. One of the most fascinating discussions presented in D-Day has nothing to do with alien spacecraft or advanced technology. Instead, it revolves around a question that has followed humanity for generations. Do governments have the right to keep the truth from the public? This question runs through the entire film, forcing viewers to reflect on the delicate balance between national security and transparency. If we imagine that world governments had known about an extraterrestrial civilization for decades, what justification could possibly exist for keeping such a secret? Some would argue that it would be necessary to prevent worldwide panic. Others would see it as one of the greatest betrayals in human history. And it is within that conflict that D-Day seems to find much of its emotional and philosophical strength. We live in an era where trust in institutions is constantly being tested. Political scandals, classified document leaks, international espionage, and battles over information have become almost routine headlines. In that context, the idea of governments hiding a world-changing secret doesn't seem nearly as impossible as it once did. But there's another important factor to consider. The bigger the secret, the harder it becomes to keep. An operation of that magnitude would require the involvement of thousands of people. Military officials, scientists, politicians, intelligence agencies, government employees. And that raises an unavoidable question. Would it really be possible to hide something this enormous for decades without the truth eventually coming out? That very question has fueled countless conspiracy theories around the world. The film cleverly taps into that collective imagination, using it as the foundation for a story filled with tension and uncertainty. But beneath that lies an even deeper layer. Perhaps the real issue isn't whether governments kept a secret. Perhaps the more important question is, how would society react if it discovered it had been deceived for generations? Imagine learning that information capable of completely redefining humanity's understanding of the universe had been deliberately hidden. Trust in institutions would collapse almost overnight. People would begin questioning everything. If they kept this from us, what else have they hidden? That kind of thinking could trigger a domino effect, shaking not only governments but also public confidence in science, journalism, academia, and every official source of information. At that moment, D-Day stops being merely a science fiction film. It becomes a meditation on power itself. Because whoever controls information controls the narrative. And whoever controls the narrative influences how billions of people perceive reality. Throughout history, knowledge has always been a source of power. Kings controlled written records. Empires guarded their maps. Nations classified military technologies. Corporations protect industrial secrets worth billions. Information has always been one of humanity's most valuable strategic assets. That's why the premise presented in D-Day is so compelling. It forces us to confront a difficult question. Who gets to decide what society has the right to know? There's an old saying, knowledge is power. But perhaps an even more accurate version would be, control knowledge, and you control the future. Another strength of the film is that it refuses to offer easy answers. Instead, it invites the audience to wrestle with uncomfortable moral dilemmas. Imagine yourself in the position of a world leader. If revealing the truth could trigger economic collapse, global unrest, widespread violence, and the loss of millions of lives, would you tell the public immediately? Or would you wait, believing that delaying the truth might protect humanity? It's an extraordinarily difficult decision. On one side lies the public's right to know. On the other lies the responsibility to prevent global chaos. There is no simple answer. And perhaps that ambiguity is one of D-Day's greatest strengths. The film never tells viewers who is right or wrong. Instead, it presents a moral dilemma and allows every audience member to reach their own conclusions. By the end, the story has become about far more than extraterrestrials. It becomes a reflection on trust, authority, transparency, and the extent to which we are willing to allow others to decide which truths we are permitted to know. Because if there is anything more powerful than an alien spacecraft, it is information. And whoever controls information has the power to shape the future of humanity itself. There's an aspect of D-Day that some viewers may overlook, yet it is precisely what makes the film far more compelling than just another story about extraterrestrials. At its core, the movie is about the human mind. More specifically, it's about how entire societies react when a single truth has the power to shatter everything they once believed. Throughout history, humanity has constantly sought to create a sense of control. We built governments, religions, legal systems, economic structures, and scientific theories to organize the world around us. These systems provide stability. They give us the comforting illusion that we understand who we are and what our place in the universe truly is. But imagine that foundation suddenly collapsing overnight. Imagine that the existence of an intelligence far more advanced than humanity is officially confirmed. In an instant, questions we believed had long been answered become mysteries once again. Who are we? Are we really the pinnacle of evolution? Has another civilization been watching humanity for centuries? What is our true place in the universe? Questions like these could trigger an unprecedented identity crisis on a global scale. And that's where psychology enters the conversation. Experts explain that the human brain struggles to adapt when deeply rooted paradigms are suddenly overturned. When new information directly contradicts beliefs we've held our entire lives, our first instinct is often rejection. It's a psychological defense mechanism. Accepting a completely new reality requires reorganizing our thoughts, our beliefs, and sometimes even our core values. That process is uncomfortable. It forces us to abandon familiar ideas and rebuild our understanding of the world from the ground up. For that reason, many people would rather deny overwhelming evidence than reconstruct their entire worldview. History has demonstrated this pattern countless times. When the idea that Earth revolves around the Sun began to gain acceptance, it faced enormous resistance. When Charles Darwin introduced the theory of evolution, many rejected it because it challenged long-standing beliefs. Even modern innovations such as the Internet and artificial intelligence were initially met with skepticism and fear. Profound change almost always inspires anxiety before it inspires acceptance. Now imagine a transformation infinitely greater than any of those. The official confirmation that intelligent life exists beyond Earth. The psychological impact would be enormous. Some people would be fascinated. Others would panic. Some would search for spiritual explanations. Others would insist it's all part of a global conspiracy. Many would simply refuse to believe it at all. Every individual would respond according to their personal experiences, cultural background, beliefs, and worldview. But collective psychology extends far beyond individual behavior. When millions of people experience intense emotions simultaneously, powerful social movements emerge that can reshape entire civilizations. Fear can unite people, but it can also breed intolerance. It can encourage dialogue, or fuel conflict. History repeatedly shows that periods of profound uncertainty are often accompanied by an explosion of misinformation. False narratives spread rapidly. Rumors gain momentum. People desperately search for simple answers to incredibly complex questions. And in doing so, society becomes increasingly unstable. Perhaps D-Day is offering a subtle critique of this very phenomenon. Perhaps the film is suggesting that humanity's greatest challenge would not be making contact with another civilization. The real challenge would be learning how to emotionally process such a discovery. There's also a fascinating philosophical layer beneath the story. Human beings have always liked to see themselves as special. We want to believe we occupy a unique place in the universe. But if we were to encounter a civilization thousands, or even millions of years more advanced than our own, we might be forced to accept that we are only a tiny part of something unimaginably larger. That realization could inspire humility. But it could also trigger an existential crisis unlike anything humanity has ever experienced. Who are we? What is the purpose of our history? How much do we truly know about the universe? Those questions may prove far more frightening than any alien technology. At its heart, D-Day seems to suggest that the greatest revolution would not occur in the skies above us. It would happen inside the human mind. Because transforming a civilization begins with transforming the way it sees itself. Perhaps that's exactly why this film has sparked so many conversations. It uses science fiction as its backdrop, but speaks about something profoundly real. Our struggle to let go of old certainties and accept that the universe may be far more complex than we ever imagined. Ultimately, the central conflict presented in D-Day is not a battle between humans and extraterrestrials. It is a battle between fear and our willingness to evolve. And that is a conflict humanity has been fighting since the very beginning of its existence. We've now reached one of the most fascinating aspects of the film, the meaning behind its very title. At first glance, D-Day may seem like nothing more than a powerful name chosen to capture the audience's attention. But when we take a closer look at the story, it becomes clear that the title carries a much deeper symbolism. Historically, the term D-Day is most famously associated with the Allied invasion of Normandy on June 6, 1944, during World War II. That day marked the beginning of an operation that would change the course of world history. After it, nothing would ever be the same again. And perhaps that is exactly the idea the film is trying to convey. The story's D-Day is not merely a date. It represents a moment of rupture. A moment when humanity crosses an invisible boundary and enters an entirely new reality. Think about some of the most transformative events in human history. The invention of writing. The discovery of fire. The Industrial Revolution. The moon landing. The creation of the Internet. Each of these milestones divided history into two distinct eras, before and after. There is a world that existed before those breakthroughs, and a completely different world that emerged afterward. If official contact with an extraterrestrial civilization were ever to happen, we would likely be facing a transformation even greater than any of those events. It wouldn't simply be a major news story. It would be a paradigm shift for the entire human species. Schools would need to rethink their curricula. Scientists would be confronted with entirely new questions. Philosophers would debate the meaning of consciousness on a cosmic scale. Religious leaders would revisit and reinterpret ancient texts. Governments would be forced to develop new international policies. Even our understanding of identity could change. For thousands of years, humanity has divided itself by nations, cultures, and languages. But in the face of another intelligent civilization, perhaps we would finally begin to see ourselves as what we truly are, a single human race. That is one of the film's most powerful symbols. Sometimes it takes something completely external to remind us of what we've shared all along. There is an idea explored in D-Day that may be the deepest and most thought-provoking theme in the entire story. It is not about spacecraft. It is not about technology. It is not about invasions. It is about humanity's ego. Ever since our ancestors first looked up at the night sky, one question has followed our species. What is our place in the universe? For thousands of years, many civilizations believed that Earth was the center of everything. The sun revolved around us. The stars existed to illuminate our world. The universe seemed as though it had been created exclusively for humanity. But science gradually transformed that perception. We discovered that Earth revolves around the Sun. Then we learned that the Sun is just an ordinary star among hundreds of billions within our galaxy. Later, we realized that the Milky Way itself is merely one galaxy among billions scattered throughout the cosmos. With every new discovery, humanity was forced to confront the same uncomfortable truth. We occupy a much smaller place in the universe than we once imagined. And yet, despite all of this, many still believe that we are the only intelligent life that exists. D-Day challenges precisely that assumption. What if we are wrong once again? What if there is a civilization millions of years more advanced than our own? How would that change the way we see ourselves? The question may sound simple, but its implications are enormous. Much of human identity has been built around the idea of uniqueness. We like to believe that we are special, that we are exceptional, that we occupy a privileged position in creation. The confirmation of another intelligent species could profoundly shake that worldview. Suddenly, we would be forced to acknowledge that we are simply one species among many, trying to understand a universe far greater than our current ability to comprehend. For some people, that realization would be liberating. It would mean becoming part of a much larger cosmic community. It could mark the beginning of a new era of knowledge and discovery. But for others, the same revelation could trigger a profound existential crisis. If we are not unique, what is our role? If another civilization is vastly more advanced, what does human progress truly mean? If they have solved problems that we still struggle with, what would that reveal about us? These are not easy questions. Instead, it places the audience in front of an uncomfortable mirror. There is also a fascinating historical parallel. Every time humanity has discovered something that diminished its central position in the universe, resistance followed. When we accepted that Earth was not the center of the cosmos, entire worldviews had to be rebuilt. When we understood that humanity was part of the evolutionary process of life, many traditional beliefs were challenged as well. The confirmation of extraterrestrial life could represent the greatest intellectual transformation in human history. Not simply because it would prove that other intelligent beings exist, but because it would force us to abandon the notion that we are the pinnacle of existence. And that requires humility, a quality that has not always been abundant throughout the history of civilizations. After highlighting everything that makes D-Day such a compelling experience, it's also important to examine some of the aspects that may divide audiences. And that doesn't mean the film is flawed. Quite the opposite. The stories that stay with us are often the ones that spark discussion. Not every great film appeals to everyone. Some challenge expectations. Some demand patience. And some simply offer a different experience than what audiences were expecting. In the case of D-Day, one of the first points of division may be its pacing. We live in an era dominated by short-form content, rapid editing, and constant stimulation. Many viewers walk into a theater expecting non-stop action. They expect chases, massive battles, explosions, major twists every few minutes. But D-Day chooses a different path. It builds its story gradually. It prioritizes character development, atmosphere, and questions before it delivers answers. For some viewers, that makes the experience more immersive. For others, it may feel slow. Ultimately, it depends on the expectations each person brings into the theater. Another aspect that may generate mixed reactions is the number of mysteries left unresolved. Not everything is explained. Not every question receives a definitive answer. The film leaves room for interpretation. And that quality has always divided audiences. Some people love leaving a movie theater discussing theories and piecing together the story for themselves. Others prefer narratives that provide clear explanations for every event. D-Day seems to place more trust in its audience. It offers clues, symbols, and ideas. But it also allows viewers to complete part of the experience through their own interpretation. Another interesting element is that the film places humanity, not necessarily the extraterrestrials, at the center of the narrative. Those expecting a story focused exclusively on alien technology or interstellar conflict may be surprised. The film appears far more interested in exploring how we react to the unknown than in revealing who might be arriving from space. And that choice completely changes the tone of the story. Rather than a traditional adventure, what we get is a reflection on fear, identity, power, and transformation. For viewers who enjoy philosophical science fiction, this approach may be captivating. For those seeking pure action-driven entertainment, it may feel less satisfying. The film also asks difficult questions. And difficult questions often create discomfort. Would we truly trust our institutions in the face of a revelation this profound? Would our beliefs withstand it? Could humanity act as a united species? Or would we simply repeat the conflicts that have shaped our history? These questions are not included merely to move the plot forward. They function as an invitation to reflect. There is also a fascinating message hidden beneath the entire narrative. Perhaps D-Day is not really a story about first contact. Perhaps it is a story about maturity. About a civilization learning to look at itself and recognize how much it still has to learn. Because every great step forward requires humility. No society grows by believing it already possesses all the answers. Progress begins the moment we are willing to ask new questions. And perhaps that is the film's central purpose. Not to provide certainty, but to awaken curiosity. At the end of the day, regardless of how each viewer interprets the story, one thing seems clear. D-Day uses science fiction to explore profoundly human themes. The fear of the unknown. The search for truth. The burden of power. The fragility of institutions. The importance of science. The strength of belief. And the challenge of finding our place within a universe that appears far larger than we can truly comprehend. Perhaps we will never discover whether another intelligent civilization is actually watching Earth. But the simple act of imagining that possibility reveals a great deal about who we are. It reveals our fears, our hopes, our limitations, and also our extraordinary capacity to dream. After all, it was by looking toward the sky that humanity learned to navigate, created calendars, developed astronomy, and began to understand its own planet. Perhaps looking at the stars remains one of the most powerful ways of looking inward. And that is precisely why D-Day goes beyond being just another science fiction film. It reminds us that the greatest journey is not crossing the vastness of space. It is expanding the boundaries of our own consciousness. If this story leaves you thinking for hours, or even days, after leaving the theater, then it has accomplished its purpose. Because some films entertain. Others move us emotionally. But there are a rare few that change the way we see the world. And that may be D-Day's greatest achievement. We've reached the end of this analysis. But perhaps this is exactly where the real discussion begins. D-Day is not simply a film about a possible extraterrestrial revelation. It is a story that uses science fiction to hold a mirror up to humanity itself. Throughout the film, we see themes of fear, power, politics, collective psychology, philosophy, and humanity's timeless desire to find answers to the things we still do not understand. Yet one question echoes from the very beginning of the story to its final moments. Are we truly prepared to discover that we are not alone in the universe? Many people believe we are. Others argue that a revelation of this magnitude would fundamentally transform our civilization. Perhaps religions would need to reinterpret long-held beliefs. Perhaps science would enter an entirely new era. Perhaps national borders would lose some of their meaning in the face of a greater identity. The identity of sharing the same planet. Or perhaps none of that would happen. Perhaps, after the initial shock, people would still go to work, pay their bills, and continue their daily routines. Because life always seems to find a way to move forward. And that is one of D-Day's greatest strengths. It does not attempt to predict the future with certainty. Instead, it invites every viewer to imagine how they would personally react to a discovery capable of changing everything. There is also an interesting irony at the heart of the story. For decades, we have searched for signs of life beyond Earth. We have built enormous telescopes, sent probes into deep space, invested billions in exploring the cosmos. Yet at the same time, we continue to struggle with challenges here on our own world. Wars, inequality, intolerance, environmental crises, political conflicts. Perhaps the film is reminding us that true progress does not depend solely on finding another civilization. It depends on becoming a better civilization ourselves. Because if humanity ever does make contact with another intelligence, the question will not simply be, who are they? The question will also be, who are we? What image are we presenting to the universe? A species driven by cooperation or division, by curiosity or fear, by the pursuit of knowledge, or by attachment to its own certainties. That reflection transforms D-Day into something greater than a 2-hour entertainment experience. It becomes an exercise in imagining the future of humanity itself. And perhaps the true meaning of the title lies precisely there. The D-Day is not merely the day of revelation. It is the day of choice. The moment when a civilization decides whether it will remain trapped by its old fears or take the next step in its evolution. In the end, perhaps the film's most powerful message is both simple and profound. The universe may be infinite, but our capacity to learn may be as well. As long as there are questions waiting among the stars, there will be people determined to answer them. And that curiosity, more than any technology, is what has driven humanity forward. From the first explorers who crossed unknown oceans to the scientists who now explore the farthest reaches of space. If you enjoyed this analysis, share this video with someone who also loves thinking about the great mysteries of the universe. And let us know in the comments. If the existence of intelligent life beyond Earth were officially announced tomorrow, would you feel fear, hope, or curiosity? Because perhaps the answer reveals more about us than it does about any extraterrestrial civilization. Until the next video. If you enjoyed this type of content, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. In future videos, you'll delve even deeper into the mysteries of humanity.